Good evening and welcome to the Hatfield Museum and History Society January Community Program. I'm Larry Stevens, President of the Society, and once again we are broadcasting to you live from the Hatfield History Museum. So again, thanks for joining us. Normally, this being the first program of the year, we would hold our annual membership meeting, but in lieu of the meeting, I would just like to take a few minutes to read the 2020 annual report of the Board of Directors. This won't take long. So it's the annual report of the Board of Directors for the year 2020. The Board of Directors is pleased to report on another year of preserving and promoting the history of Hatfield in the year 2020, our 29th year. Membership in the Society for 2020 was 196. The year 2020 started with much promise as an exciting year for the Society. Renovations to the new museum building finished by the end of January, and plans were started for a spring grand opening celebration. The Township Commissioners toured the newly renovated building on March 11th and were very impressed with what we had all done to the old building. And then the pandemic struck in full force. All work on setting up the museum displays had to be put on hold while much of the country was in lockdown mode. As restrictions were eased in June, work on assembling the various displays began again, and by August the museum was ready to open its doors to the public, but without the grand opening celebration. Reservations were also required for museum visits in order to limit public contact. It certainly wasn't the opening that we had hoped for, but visitors to the new museum have greatly enjoyed the experience. Early in the year, Society board member Christine "Kitty" Heckler expressed her desire to retire from the board, and her resignation was accepted with much thanks. Kitty, in addition to being a longtime board member, had also, for many years, chaired the refreshment committee and organized the refreshments which followed each of our programs. The Society Board of Directors, in a gesture of appreciation, named Christine "Kitty" Heckler as Director Emeritus. The Board of Directors soon began to look for someone to fill Kitty's board seat, and it wasn't long before they decided on Frank DeMaria. Although Frank was a relative newcomer to the Society, he had a long passion for history and quickly demonstrated his willingness and desire to assist the Society in any way he could. He was very helpful in moving the collection into the museum and has been instrumental in photographically documenting endangered historic structures in Hatfield. The board looks forward to the membership having the opportunity to meet Frank in the future. The board continued to present regularly scheduled, interesting, and informative programs for its members and the community throughout the year. The annual meeting of the Society was held in January 2020, as called for in the Society bylaws. Following the meeting, a program titled History of Hatfield Quality Meats was presented. Beginning in March, since we were unable to present our programs in person, the programs were presented live on Facebook. The community programs for the rest of the year were, in March, History of Hatfield Museum and History Society, including photos of the new museum renovation process. In May, the program was another edition of This and That. In September, the program was If These Walls Could Talk. And in November, the program was Hatfield, PA, Turkeytown, USA. Many people from across the country are continuing to enjoy reconnecting with Hatfield's history through the Society's Facebook social media page, which was started in 2013. Over 2,680 people are following the site, which shares old photos and memories of Hatfield. The Society continues to publish the Hatfield High School Grad Gazette newsletter 3 times a year, which is much appreciated by the almost 400 people who receive it. We thank members John Wireman and John Stevens for the time they spent auditing the 2019 books and records of the treasurer last year, and everything was found to be in order. During 2020, we sadly bid farewell to many society members. Barbara Ann Masser, Charter member Adele Detweiler-Vaughn, Ralph J. Folcarelli, Charter member Gloria J. Nolan, Teresa M. Whitman-Ray, Karen Rappold Weierbach, David Nace, Charter member Doris Watson-Gerges, Alfred Gottschall, and Betty Slaughter-Redding. Earlier this year, the Society was able to move almost all of its collection out of storage and into the new museum building. We are very grateful to Hatfield Borough and Howard Heckler for providing storage space for the Society in the past. Only a few large items remain in Howard's garage, which we plan to move to the museum this year. We also acknowledge with gratitude Hatfield Township for cutting the grass on the property and Hatfield Borough for snow removal in the winter. Respectfully submitted by the Board of Directors, Larry Stevens, President, Bob Kaler, Vice President, Shirley Culp, Secretary, Debbie Stevens, Treasurer, Frank DeMaria, Alan Culp, and Greg Schisler. That wasn't too bad, I hope. All right, we'll get ready to start our program for this evening, and we'll adjust the camera. And while we're adjusting the camera, I'd like to suggest that maybe you could leave us a comment and let us know where you are watching from. I want to also thank everyone for their 2021 membership renewals and to those who made donations to the museum fund. We greatly appreciate everyone's support of the Society. All right, tonight's program is titled Holiday Homicide. Now, usually these community presentations are generally a fun look back on Hatfield's history that hopefully evoke fond memories and feelings of nostalgia. But of course, not all of Hatfield's history is of a positive nature. The program, The Hatfield Horror, the story of the great train wreck of 1900, was certainly a more somber story, though still quite interesting, I think. Tonight's program, Holiday Homicide, as you might surmise from the title, is another one of those more somber programs, but hopefully you will enjoy it and find it interesting all the same. Now, this is the second presentation I've done of this program. I had originally presented it back in 2014. Back in December of 2013, I was struggling to come up with a fresh new program idea for the January community program. In fact, in frustration, I had even contemplated just canceling the program and taking a break because I just could not think of a new idea for an interesting program. I had a sort of writer's block. And then the clouds parted, the sun shone brightly through, and the angels sang, and out of the deep, dark recesses of my mind, the idea for this program thankfully came to me. You see, I recalled that back in the early years of the Society, Florence Kreider, the widow of former Hatfield Borough Police Chief Herbert Kreider, donated a box of old Hatfield Borough police records to the Society. This was, of course, long after the Hatfield Borough Police Department had been dissolved. Included in this box of police records was a file on Janice Decker's murder, complete with copies of witness statements, the confession statement, and even crime scene photos. But rest assured, I will spare you the most gruesome of these photos. All of this information put together made for quite an interesting story, I thought, and that's how I came up with the idea for tonight's program. Now, interestingly, when I began this program in December 2013, I had no idea that the man who committed this murder was still alive. And not only was he alive, but he was not incarcerated as one might think after committing such a heinous crime. In fact, he was still living locally, but more on that later. Hatfield Borough in 1960 was a much different place than it is today. And while the town has managed to maintain some of its small town charm, it is certainly not the same place it was 60 years ago. For those of you who have been around that long, think back to how life was in Hatfield Borough back in 1960. To help you remember that time, consider this. Knight's Hotel was still standing on the corner of Broad and Market Street, although the owner, Chester Knight, did die in March of that year. There were no nearby supermarkets back then, but you could pick up your groceries and just about anything else you needed at Detweiler's Economy Market at Broad and Market Street, or Wally Nice's store at Main and Lincoln. Doc Herzl still owned the Hatfield Pharmacy, although he would soon be selling it to longtime employee Robert Porter. Across the street at the Hatfield Savings and Loan, you could find Luther Moyer, who was secretary of the association, and his sister, Ruth Walter, who was office secretary. The post office, with Postmaster John Wolfe, was still doing business out of the building on the other corner of Broad and Cherry Street. You could buy a copy of the Penn Valley Times from Horace Inky Davis at his news agency, restaurant, pool hall, and next door in the former trolley station building, Inky's son, Don, was operating the Liberty Bell Art Shop. You had a good number of places right here in the borough that you could gas up your car. Among them, there was Clifford Nick Gerhardt's Mobile Station at Main and Poplar Street, where Hatfield Pizza is now. J. Walter Snyder's Atlantic Station was nearby, where Gottschall's Garage is now. And Johnny Schwartz's Texaco Station was down Main Street in South Hatfield, where Victor's Auto Care is now. At 14 West Broad Street, you can get your hair cut by barber Titus Skeet Strager or his young assistant barber, Dale Moyer. And you could hardly drive through town without the watchful eyes of Hatfield Borough Chief of Police Herbert Kreider falling on you. Does that take you back to 1960? All right, so the scene is set for our program, Holiday Homicide. It was a late Monday night, December 26, 1960. It had been a very nice, happy Christmas holiday, William Joseph Decker thought, as he drove his 1956 four-door Chevy sedan through the late night darkness. He was driving on Cowpath Road near Moyers Road, headed back to his home in Hatfield Borough. It was nice to have had a few days off from work. As a truck mechanic at Martin Century Farms, the two recent snowstorms had the 26-year-old William, or Bill as he was known, working a 70-hour week, keeping the dairy's trucks on the road. The day before, Christmas Day, had been full of fun, watching his 24-year-old wife Janice and their 2.5-year-old son William Jr., or Billy as they called him, open their presents. Santa had brought Billy, among other things, a truck that he could ride on and a spring rocking horse. Bill had gotten Janice a new camera for Christmas, so they used it to take a number of pictures in front of their Christmas tree, covered with glittering tinsel strands. They had a great Christmas tree, Bill thought. It was a smaller tree, but it was set atop a large elevated train platform, which made it look bigger. Janice's parents, John and Luella Knockjar, who lived in nearby Lansdale, had joined them for Christmas dinner last night. He liked Janice's parents very well. Her father was a retired Philadelphia policeman, and every weekday, John Knockjar would drive his wife to watch little Billy at the Deckers' house because Janice had to leave for work before Bill got home from his job. And now Bill, his wife, and son were returning home after a holiday visit with Janice's older half-brother, Elwin Richard Berger, and his wife at their home in Southampton, Bucks County. The Deckers had arrived at the Bergers' house around 8:15 p.m., and they had enjoyed the time together catching up on each other's lives. The Deckers related to the Bergers the events of the wonderful Christmas day that they had enjoyed. Bill mentioned that he had recently bought a 1950 Chevrolet for his wife. And while he sipped on a highball, they discussed plans for New Year's Day. Bill and Janice Decker had hoped that the Bergers would be able to come to their house for a party on New Year's Day, but the Bergers already had other plans. They did, however, make arrangements for the Bergers to visit them on January 2nd to celebrate the arrival of 1961 together. It was nice to spend time with Janice's family, Bill thought. Bill Decker had no family. He was born on January 28, 1934 in Center Square, Pennsylvania. His father, William, had died when Bill was just a young teenager. His mother, Mary, was still alive, but, well, he hated her. She had always been a bit of a drinker, and Bill always felt that she was too hard on his father, who he loved dearly. And in his eyes, she caused him to die at an early age, even though he was 70 years old when he died. And for this, he would not forgive her. And then there was the time when Bill was 17. He had met a pretty girl at the skating rink, and they really hit it off. They went steady for 6 months and got along real well. Until one day, after having a few drinks, Bill's mother called the girl's parents and said some things that shouldn't have been said. The girl's parents forced her to break up with Bill, and his heart was broken terribly. As an older teenager, Bill had developed some unusual sexual desires. His mother was aware of them and told Bill that they were wrong, but he always felt that she should have done more, maybe taken him to a doctor or something. She probably didn't know any better, but that didn't matter to Bill. He still blamed her. So while his mother was still living, she was basically dead to him. As the Deckers' car reached Orvilla Road, Bill and Janice could easily see the Hatfield Borough Christmas stars shining through the darkness from high atop the Hatfield Water Tower on Wayne Avenue, just off of West Broad Street. With the unusual bitter cold temperatures the area had been experiencing lately, the snow from the 2 recent storms still laid on the yards and fields along Cowpath Road, helping to brighten the late-night darkness. Bill Decker loved his wife, Janice. He felt like she was the best thing that ever happened to him. Janice Knockjar was born in Philadelphia and lived there until her family moved to Lansdale in 1947 when she was 10 years old. She had attended Lansdale High School, where she took secretarial courses and participated in the school choir and the school operetta. She graduated in 1954 and soon after got a job at Martin Century Farms. Bill Decker and Janice Knockjar had met in 1954 at Martin Century Farms, where they were both working at that time. She was a bright, smart, attractive girl. Bill was a tall, slender, lanky fellow with brown hair and blue eyes. At 6 feet 4 inches, he was a good 8 inches taller than Janice. They had dated for a year and a half before getting married 5 years ago in 1955, when he was 21 and she was 19. They were both just kids when they got married, and there were some things that neither of them knew about how to be intimate with each other. No one had ever told them anything, so they had to buy a couple of books early on in their marriage to help them both in this area. Although Bill had been raised in the Catholic faith, with Janice having been raised a Lutheran, Bill started joining her, attending services at Trinity Lutheran Church in Lansdale. Little Billy was born in 1958, and Bill Decker was a kind and loving father, very close to his young son, much like he was very close to his father. The Deckers' car drove into Hatfield Borough, decorated as usual with festive, colorful Christmas lights. The borough also had a large steel Christmas tree lit up down on the railroad station property. In the daylight it looked sad, even pathetic, but in the dark of night, with all the bright, colorful lights strung on it, one could almost imagine that it was a real tree. The Deckers passed through Main and Broad Street with its signal traffic signal hanging in the middle of the intersection, which at this late hour was now flashing red and yellow. The Christmas lights strung overhead across the street reflected off the hood of the Deckers' two-tone turquoise and ivory car. Life was good for the Deckers. They were living the American dream. They had a lovely little boy, a house, 2 cars, and they both had decent paying jobs, so that they didn't really have to stress about finances. Just before reaching the E.B. Laudenschlager Elementary School, Bill Decker turned right onto East School Street, a quiet, dead-end street on the edge of Hatfield Borough, lined with modest, cookie-cutter Cape Cod houses. He headed down the street to number 62, the second to the last house on the right, pulled in the driveway and into the attached garage. The 1.5-story frame house at 62 East School Street had 5 rooms on the first floor: a kitchen, a living room, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms, one slightly larger than the other, which was Bill and Janice's room. The house had a full finished basement where little Billy liked to play with his toys, and Bill had a small workshop. Also in the basement, Bill had a shooting range of sorts set up where he enjoyed target shooting. Bill was somewhat of a gun fancier. He belonged to a gun club and had a nice-sized collection, including 6 rifles, 2 shotguns, 5 handguns, and a pellet gun. But he always treated guns with great carefulness and respect, never using them in a wrong or foolish manner. He felt quite strongly about this, and he didn't have any time for gun owners who didn't share the same high principles. The second story of the Deckers' house was an unfinished attic, which was used for storage space. This was where the Christmas decorations were kept most of the year, along with the Deckers' off-season clothing. Bill also stored a few of his guns in the attic space. The Deckers had moved into this house on East School Street 2 years earlier. Interestingly, Bill Decker didn't let his contempt for his mother keep him from letting her fund the down payment for the house. In May 1959, not long after the Deckers moved into their new home, Janice got a new job at the Hanson Textile Company, a manufacturer of dishcloths, located on East Broad Street in Hatfield Borough, not far from her home. Charles Rothschild, the manager and treasurer of Hanson's, liked Janice. And why not? She was a good worker and was well liked by the other employees. Janice was a bright girl with excellent shorthand and typing skills. At Hanson's, she worked as the billing clerk and stenographer. By all indications, Charles Rothschild thought that Janice Decker was very happy with her home life. But another Hanson employee, Joan Marchuk, knew that there was one area of the Deckers' home life that was of concern to Janice: sex. It seemed that Bill Decker's desire for sex, at least once a week, was more than Janice was interested in. In fact, she had questioned Joan if this was normal. But Janice always knew better than to refuse him. Bill could have quite a temper. Bill Decker liked to read. Even as a teenager, he enjoyed reading. But his preference for books was unusual and leaned toward sadistic books about war that were full of torture and killing. As an adult, Bill enjoyed the true detective comic books and a magazine called Offbeat Detective Stories. There were a good number of detective comic books on the market back in 1960, so to separate themselves from the throng of other detective fiction magazines already on the stands, Offbeat Detective Stories added graphic brutality, bondage, and gruesome and violent sex in their stories. And Bill Decker enjoyed that. The Deckers entered their home, which felt warm and cozy compared to the frigid cold temperature outside. The cheerful lights of their Christmas tree greeted them in the living room. Janice took little Billy into his room and got him settled into his crib before she herself turned in for the night in the adjoining bedroom. She had to get up early in the morning to report for work at Hanson's at 8 o'clock. Bill, because he worked the swing shift at the dairy, was on a different sleep schedule than his wife. So he headed down to the basement to spend some time target shooting with one of his guns. Later, before finally retiring for the night to the bedroom, he stopped by the kitchen to enjoy two 2-ounce shots of Seagram's VO whiskey. Bill had been having trouble sleeping lately due to some back problems, and he found that the whiskey sometimes helped him to sleep better. As he walked to his bedroom and crawled into the double bed next to his sleeping wife, he noticed that the clock on the dresser read 2:30. It wasn't long before Bill Decker realized that the whiskey he had enjoyed hadn't done much to numb the pain in his aching back. He crawled out of bed, made his way to the bathroom, took a couple of Bufferin tablets, and returned to bed to try to get some sleep. Bill slept restlessly, only little cat naps slipping in and out of consciousness just briefly, until he awoke at 3 a.m. He slipped out of bed as Janice continued sleeping. He stood next to his wife, next to the bed, for a few moments, staring at his sleeping wife. "Go ahead and kill her. Kill her," he heard a voice say. It was as if the voice was coming from behind him, but he knew it was coming from within his own head. "No," another voice said, "I love her." He quickly left the bedroom, went into the nearby bathroom, and smoked a cigarette. This wasn't the first time that Bill Decker had heard these voices in his head. He had heard them many times before over the past 2 years. But they had never been this violent. Before, when he heard these voices, he would get these bizarre, twisted urges to hit his wife in the stomach with his fist while she slept. He had strangely found this act sexually exciting. But he himself just couldn't understand why he got such a thrill out of hurting someone he loved. Even as he would prepare to punch her, he was shouting in his head, "Please, God, don't let me hit her." But it was uncontrollable. When she would awaken after being punched, she would just get this startled, scared, confused look on her face and ask him why. He would always explain it the same way. He had punched her accidentally while tossing in his sleep. He had found in the past that if he couldn't actually see his wife, the voice inside his head sometimes stopped. And sitting there now in the bathroom, smoking his cigarette, it seemed to be helping. When he finished his cigarette, he returned to the bedroom. Again he went over to the bed and stood over his sleeping wife. "Go ahead and do it," the voice inside his head shouted again. "No," the other voice responded. Suddenly there was a noise inside his head, like a machine buzzing. He turned and walked out of the bedroom and started down the basement stairs. His head felt like it was in a vacuum, like he was floating in a bottle of ether. He was in the basement now, looking for something, but he wasn't sure what. His eyes fell on a piece of gray galvanized pipe, 1 3/8 inches in diameter and about 17 inches long. He had used it before to give himself leverage on his pipe wrench when he did some plumbing work on the house. He grabbed a pipe and with it gripped tightly in his right hand, he went up the steps and walked back into the bedroom. Once again, he walked over to the left side of the bed and stood over his still sleeping wife. She was lying on her right side, facing him. "Kill her," the voice shouted again. "No, you don't want to hurt your wife. You don't want to do it." It was like two little kids seesawing as he heard the voices again. He raised the pipe over his head, quickly grabbed his wife's hair with his left hand to keep her head still, and brought the pipe down hard, at least twice, on Janice's head, and then several more times on her body, fracturing a rib. Janice whimpered for a short time, like an injured dog, Bill thought, and then she was silent. It was 3:20 a.m., and his wife was dead. The pipe fell out of Bill Decker's hand and onto the floor. Bill had planned to have sex with his wife after hitting her. That is what he usually did after punching her. But now, after seeing the blood, so much blood, that thought quickly vanished completely from his mind. As the realization came to him that he had killed his wife, Bill knew that he had to get away, far away. For some reason, Florida came to his mind. He wasn't sure why, because he had absolutely no idea how to get to Florida. And he would have to get rid of the body, too. He didn't want his mother-in-law to see Janice's body this way, he thought. He got a towel and wrapped it around Janice's bloodied head, and then wrapped her body in 2 blankets that were on the bed. He went down to the basement and grabbed a length of clothesline. Returning to the bedroom, he cut 3 pieces of clothesline that he then used to secure the 2 blankets around his wife's body. When this task was completed, he went into the bathroom to wash the blood from his hands. It was now 6 a.m. 36-year-old Eleanor Felix, the Decker's next-door neighbor, woke up, got dressed, and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast for her husband, James. At 6:15, she heard a car start and looked out the kitchen window. She watched as Bill Decker backed the car out of the driveway, turned the car around in the street, and then backed the car into the garage, leaving the front part of the car extending out of the garage. She didn't really think anything of this, as it was not unusual for Bill to work on his car in the early morning. Eleanor and Jim Felix liked the Deckers. They were very good neighbors and seemed very compatible. Jim was also an automobile mechanic, so he and Bill had a lot in common, having similar jobs. Eleanor especially enjoyed talking with Janice. Once Janice asked Eleanor what kind of birth control she took. She confided that although she wanted to have another child, Bill would kill her if she ever became pregnant again. At the time, Eleanor Felix wasn't sure if Janice was really serious or if it was just an exaggerated expression. Just recently, the two women had talked together on the phone. A couple of days ago on Friday night, December 23rd, they had talked about each other's Christmas plans and about going to church. After Bill Decker had backed the car into the garage, he went out the rear garage door and re-entered the house through the rear kitchen door. He climbed up the stairs to the attic, grabbed the aqua blue garment bag where he kept a few of his suits, and carried it down to the living room. There he opened the bag, removed his suits, and placed them neatly on a chair. Bill then took the garment bag into the bedroom and worked his wife's lifeless body into the bag. Before he did anything else, it suddenly occurred to him he needed to make sure that his son didn't see any of this. He went into little Billy's bedroom, woke him, and carried him down to the basement to play with his toys. With Billy safely playing, Bill Decker returned to the bedroom, dragged his wife's body off of the bed, onto the floor, through the living room and hallway, and into the kitchen, a total distance of 38 feet. He then picked up the body, carried it out the back kitchen door and into the rear garage door, and placed her in the trunk of his car. The thought came to him that he would bury his wife's body somewhere. But with the snowy, bitter cold weather the Northeast had been experiencing, he would have to wait and stop somewhere along the way to Florida, where the ground was softer, to bury his wife's body. He quickly grabbed a long-handled shovel from along the wall of the garage, placed it on top of his wife's body, closed the trunk lid, and locked it. Returning to the house, Bill started packing 2 suitcases with things that he would take with him to Florida. In the smaller suitcase, he packed towels and shaving articles. In the larger suitcase, he packed some shirts, shorts, t-shirts, socks, and handkerchiefs. He grabbed his jewelry case, which held his jewelry, a pocket watch, and a Boulevard pocket watch, or wristwatch, and placed that in the larger suitcase as well. Bill went to the closet and grabbed his powder blue suit, his sports coat, and work shoes, and placed them in the suitcase. As he finished packing, Bill's toe hit something hard at the edge of the bed. It was the blood-covered pipe. He grabbed a gray bath towel from the bathroom and wrapped the pipe in it. Little Billy. Bill figured that he would drop little Billy off at a Catholic orphanage somewhere along the way to Florida. Even though he now considered himself a Lutheran, he believed that when you got brought up as a Catholic, you had a better chance in life. The Catholics teach children better, and the sisters are kind to them, he thought. Bill found a large white cardboard box, went into Billy's bedroom, and filled the box with Billy's clothes and all of his blankets. He then carried the box, along with the 2 suitcases, the towel-wrapped pipe, his suit, sports coat, and work shoes, out to the garage and placed them in the back seat of the car. Returning to the house, Bill grabbed a pistol, a revolver, and 3 boxes of ammo, and took those out and placed them into the back seat of the car as well. He decided against taking his Crossman Pelgan single-action 6-pellet gun, a replica of a Colt Peacemaker. Instead, he left it, still in its box, lying on the bed. Bill knew he would need money for his trip south, but he didn't have any. So he would have to wait to leave until the Hatfield National Bank opened so he could cash a check to get money. While he was waiting for the bank to open at 9 a.m., he neatly made up the bed, covering the blood-stained sheets and pillows with the white hobnail bedspread. Bill noticed his wife's blood starting to show through the bedspread and placed 3 small pillows and his fur-lined hooded gray jacket on the bed to cover those areas. Bill also noticed a blood spot on the floor near the head of the bed and grabbed a pair of his wife's shoes to place over the spot. He went through the house and made sure everything was in order. He took the unused clothesline and placed it under the Christmas platform in the living room. Bill then brought little Billy up from the basement and washed and dressed him. Around 7:30 a.m., Bill Decker called his mother-in-law, Luella Knockjar, who lived in Lansdale, and told her that his family was going to take a little vacation. He said that he didn't know how long they would be gone, but that he would call her when they returned. He also asked her if she would call to have milk deliveries to his house stopped. Bill next dialed the number of his employer, Martin Century Farms, to talk to Charles Pittman, the dairy's garage parts manager. Although Bill Decker pretended to be a friend calling on his behalf, Charles Pittman had talked to Decker on the phone a number of times before and easily recognized his voice, but he didn't say anything. Bill asked me to give you a call and let you know that he was called out of town and won't be in for work tonight. He said that he'd give you a call a day in advance of when he would be back in town and able to return to work. It was now 8:30 a.m. Bill Decker dialed the number for Janice's employer, Hanson Textile. 19-year-old Mrs. Mary Clayton answered the phone. "Hi, Mary," Bill Decker said. Mary had known Bill and Janice for about the past 10 months. In fact, she and her husband, John Clayton, had double dated with the Deckers before, going to see Ben-Hur at the movies together, and they had also visited at the Deckers' home a number of times. "Janice is very sick and won't be in for a couple of days, maybe a week," Bill told Mary. Then they chatted briefly about each other's Christmas, and Bill told Mary that Santa had been very good to Janice and that he had gotten her some clothes and a camera. Around 9 a.m., Bill Decker took little Billy, along with a black and white stuffed toy panda bear that the boy had gotten for Christmas, and placed them, along with the family's brown cat, in the front seat of the car with them. He started the Chevy and, with his wife's dead body in the trunk, pulled out of the driveway. It didn't take but a few minutes for him to arrive at the Hatfield National Bank at the corner of Broad and Main Street. He sat in the car for a while with young Billy. Then, as he left Billy waiting in the car, Bill Decker climbed the front steps to the bank. The hands on the clock on the front of the bank indicated that it was 9:30. Bill entered the bank, walked up to the counter, and wrote a check for $100 made out to cash. He knew that he didn't have that much in his account, but he hoped that the teller wouldn't check. As he was writing the check, the bank's assistant treasurer, James P. Musselman, greeted Bill, and Bill returned the greeting. Bill handed the check to bank teller Joan Dietrich. Joan, who lived right up the road at 60 North Main Street, knew the Deckers very well and asked him how he and his wife had enjoyed Christmas. "Very well," was his response. Joan Dietrich knew that Bill Decker had an account with the bank, so she didn't bother to check his account balance that morning. If she had, she would have discovered he only had a balance of $4.46. With $100 cash now in his pocket, Bill Decker returned to his car. Driving now, he felt like his brain was in a fog. He headed south. He didn't have the faintest idea what roads to take to get to Florida. Bill Decker was somewhat directionally challenged. He had heard somewhere that Chester was on the way to Florida, so he just started to drive towards Chester. But he even got lost trying to get to Chester. He had several maps in his glove box. He fumbled with them trying to figure out his route, but it was no use. He pulled into an Atlantic gas station to buy some fuel and get directions. He asked the attendant to fill up his tank, which cost just under $4. Decker handed the attendant a $10 bill and was given his change. He went inside the station and bought some candy bars for his hungry son. He asked the man at the station how to get to Florida and was told to take Route 40 into Georgia. Still confused, he asked the man how to get to Route 40, and the man gave him directions. Decker drove until afternoon, into Delaware, past Route 40 and the Dover, Delaware airport, but ended up getting lost again. He approached a toll bridge and asked the attendant if he was going the right way to get to Florida. The polite attendant told him no, and gave him directions on how to get to Route 13 south. But by this time, it just didn't seem to matter anymore. Bill Decker had come to the realization that he just couldn't get away with murdering his wife. He decided that he would not try to escape justice and that he would just surrender to police. Bill reached into his pocket for change to pay the toll and pulled out a silver dollar, which he gave to the attendant. As he turned around and started to head north, back towards Pennsylvania, he scolded himself. "That was Billy's silver dollar you just gave away. You shouldn't have done that. It belonged to Billy," he thought to himself. Driving north now, Bill Decker started to look for a Catholic church. He suddenly felt the need to talk to a priest. While he was still in Delaware, he stopped at a small Catholic church that he came upon, but was unable to locate anyone to talk to. He continued northward into Pennsylvania, and as he approached the small town of Linwood, he saw a sign that read, "Holy Savior Catholic Church." Around 3:45 p.m., Bill Decker parked his car in the rear of the rectory of the Holy Savior Catholic Church on Summit Street near Ridge Street in Linwood, Delaware County. He carried his son to the door of the rectory and knocked. Reverend Joseph Clymer, a young priest who was the assistant pastor at the church, answered the door. Bill Decker asked if he could talk to the priest, and Reverend Clymer invited him in. Bill Decker, who seemed to the young priest to be quite upset and confused, proceeded to tell him that he had killed his wife that morning and that her body was in the trunk of his car, which was parked outside. The young priest, because of Decker's confused state, was unsure whether the story was believable or just the rantings of a mentally disturbed man. Reverend Clymer called for the church's pastor, Reverend Daniel I. McDermott, an older priest. When Reverend McDermott entered the rectory, Decker said to him, "I want to tell you a story. I murdered my wife this morning, and I have her body in the trunk of my car." He, indicating the younger priest, "does not believe me. Do you believe me?" Reverend McDermott responded, "Yes, I do, son," and he said that he would get some help from the police. Reverend McDermott contacted the police, told them Bill Decker's story, and asked that an officer respond quickly. Minutes seemed like hours as Father McDermott waited with Bill Decker for the police to arrive. Decker, although in a quiet and remorseful mood, also seemed to the priest to be mentally disturbed. After some time, with the police still having not arrived at the rectory, Father McDermott called the police again and stressed the urgency of the situation. Linwood Police Department patrolman Joseph P. Delicat was on traffic duty at Ridge Road and Market Street, only a couple hundred feet away from the rectory, when he received a phone message saying that a policeman was wanted at the church. At around 4:30 p.m., Officer Delicat arrived at the rectory, and Reverend McDermott related to the officer Decker's story about killing his wife, and that he had placed her body in his car, which was outside. Officer Delicat left the rectory to check out the Decker's car. When he got to the vehicle, he looked into the back seat, but all he saw was a couple of suitcases and a cardboard box and some other clothing. In the front seat, there was a milk bottle, half full, on the floor of the passenger side, and chocolate candy wrappers were scattered about on the front seat. The officer returned to the rectory and said, "There's no body in the car." Officer Delicat asked Decker to come and show him where the body of his wife had been placed. Decker, who was very remorseful and hysterical by this time, gave Officer Delicat his car keys and told him to look in the trunk. The officer returned to the parking lot and walked up to the back of the Decker's automobile. He placed the key into the trunk lid lock, turned it, and opened the lid. Inside, he saw that there was indeed something in the trunk, wrapped in a blanket. Believing now that what was wrapped in a blanket could well be a body, the officer contacted Linwood Police Chief Russell Cheney to respond to the rectory. While waiting for the chief's arrival, Officer Delicat escorted Decker and the young Billy out to his patrol car, where they waited for the chief to arrive. Chief Cheney arrived at the rectory at 4:48 p.m. and was informed of the facts of the incident by Officer Delicat. Chief Cheney went to the Decker's car and saw that the blankets tied with clothesline in the trunk. He untied the rope, opened the blanket, and saw that it was indeed the body of a woman wrapped inside, clad only in a pajama top. The chief immediately called for the police doctor, Salvatore Vasili, who soon arrived at the scene, made an examination of the body in the trunk, and pronounced Janice Elaine Decker dead at 4:55 p.m. The Linwood Fire Company and ambulance crew was soon dispatched to the scene. Word quickly spread through Linwood that a murdered woman's body was discovered in the trunk of a car at the rectory, and soon a large crowd gathered at the site. Police and firemen kept the crowd from entering the parking lot area while photos were taken of the crime vehicle. The nearby row homes on Summit Street, their front porches festively decorated and colorfully lit for Christmas, were in stark contrast to the dismal scene in the rectory parking lot. After some photos were taken of the trunk, Janice's body was removed and taken to the nearby Ward Funeral Home to await an autopsy. This newspaper photo shows some Linwood ambulance crew members removing Janice's body from the trunk of the Decker's '56 Chevy. Later that night, the autopsy would show that Janice Decker had died from shock as a result of several severe blows to the left side of the head, which fractured her skull, and a fracture of the fourth vertebrae. Bill Decker, along with his son, was transported to the Delaware County Courthouse in Media, Pennsylvania for questioning. The Decker's cat, by the way, was left in the care of Father McDermott. When Decker and Billy arrived at the courthouse, police obtained food and drink for the boy and his father, who had not eaten anything except for candy bars all day. Police soon contacted Janice Decker's parents, John and Luella Nockjar, and advised them of the death of their daughter. They also asked them to come and take custody of little Billy, but due to the icy road conditions at that time, the couple decided to wait until Decker and his son were transported back to the Norristown courthouse. And can you imagine the emotional state that they would have been in at that time? While Decker was being questioned, young Billy, understandably frightened by his circumstances, began to whimper, and the police did their best to calm and entertain the young boy. At 7:50 p.m. on December 27th, Hatfield Borough Chief of Police Herbert Ryder received a call from Pennsylvania State Police reporting that a murder had taken place in his jurisdiction. He was directed to report to 62 East School Street and secure the house so that no one could enter. When Chief Crater arrived at the house, he found that the doors were locked and that several lights had been left on inside. At 8:15 p.m., a Montgomery County detective arrived at the scene of the crime to take photographs and measurements and to gather and protect evidence. The rear kitchen door was forced open and police entered the house. In the living room, which glowed with a Christmas atmosphere from the lights on the tree, police found Bill Decker's suits lying neatly on a chair. Among the Christmas cards that were on display, police found one that Decker had given to his wife, which was signed, "All my love, Bill," followed by 4 X's symbolizing kisses. They entered the bedroom and found the bed neatly made, just as Bill had left it, with no signs of a struggle. They did find 3 blood stains on the bedroom carpet that had been carefully covered with a pair of shoes. But when they turned down the bed sheet, it revealed the blood-soaked sheets, grim evidence of the violent murder that had occurred there. As police prepared to transport Decker and his son from Delaware County to Montgomery County, the tired young Billy began crying and screaming hysterically and had to be soothed by police officers. Shortly after 11 p.m., Bill Decker and Billy were transported to the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office in Norristown. Flanked by police and detectives, Bill Decker carried his son into the courthouse building. For about an hour, Bill Decker paced the floor with Billy in his arms, refusing to leave the boy in the care of others, until finally Janice's parents arrived and took custody of the child. At 1:30 a.m., while eating sandwiches and drinking coffee, Bill Decker cooperated in answering interrogation questions by Montgomery County District Attorney Harold Spencer. In stark contrast to his mostly remorseful attitude, at one point, Decker pointed out, almost with pride, that he was just like Elmo Smith, the only difference being he loved his wife. Smith had recently been convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, and his name had been everywhere in the local newspapers lately. It was almost a year earlier to the day that Elmo Lee Smith, a 40-year-old Bridgeport man, had abducted a 16-year-old Manayunk schoolgirl from a Philadelphia bus stop, raped her, beat her to death with a car jack, and dumped her body in a roadside gully in White Marsh Township. Smith had just been paroled after 10 years in prison for a series of assaults against Norristown area women, one of whom nearly died. He was also suspected, but never charged, in the rape and murder of a 5-year-old Montgomery County girl in 1947. Elmo Smith was executed on April 2nd, 1962, and was the last person executed in Pennsylvania for 33 years until 1995. During Bill Decker's interrogation by the Montgomery County District Attorney, he was asked why, with all the guns in the house, he didn't just shoot his wife. He responded that he never, ever even gave a thought to using a gun to kill his wife. It just wasn't what guns should be used for. Having given his statement to the district attorney, Bill Decker was taken to his house, the scene of the crime, arriving at 3:05 a.m. in the early morning of December 28, 1960. Here, he did a walkthrough for investigators, reenacting the steps leading up to and following the crime, which he had committed 24 hours earlier. Colored moving pictures, that's what the police report says, were also taken of the reenactment. At some point, probably to help protect him from the frigid cold weather, Decker was apparently given permission to wear the fur-lined gray jacket that he had laid on his bed to help cover the blood soaking through the bedspread. At about 4 p.m. that day, Hatfield Borough Police Chief Herbert Kreider and Montgomery County Chief of Detectives Charles Moody escorted William Decker to 60 West Broad Street, Hatfield Borough, for a hearing before Justice of the Peace Nathaniel R. Brown. Before the actual hearing started, Kreider and Moody stood with Decker on the front porch of Magistrate Brown's home to read the warrant to Decker in front of the large crowd of about 20 people, mostly reporters and photographers, who had gathered. Decker, apparently unimpressed with the entire procedure, muttered, "What a joke." This photo shows Chief Kreider and Bill Decker on the front porch of Magistrate Brown's home as the chief is reading the warrant to the gathered crowd. Kreider escorted Decker into the small office of Magistrate Brown, where state police, county detectives, the district attorney, and 6 reporters crowded in for the hearing on the charge of felonious murder. Chief Kreider first gave testimony on the evidence discovered in the Decker's home. Chief Detective Moody then testified as to the statement that Decker had given regarding the crime. This photo shows Montgomery County Chief Detective Moody on the left as he gives his testimony before Magistrate Brown. Standing behind Decker, who is dressed in the fur-lined hooded gray jacket, is Alonzo Horsey of the Defense Counsel. Next is Assistant District Attorney Vincent A. Cirillo, and on the far right is Pennsylvania State Police Trooper Harry Crane. As the testimony against him was read, Bill Decker puffed on a cigarette, showing absolutely no emotion. On the advice of his attorney, William O'Hay, Decker did not testify during the hearing but pleaded not guilty to the charge of felonious murder. After all the testimony, Justice Brown ordered that Decker be committed to the Montgomery County Prison without bail to await his grand jury hearing. This photo shows Montgomery County Detective Joseph Marlin escorting Decker out of Magistrate Brown's house after the hearing on his way to Montgomery County Prison. A few days later, on Saturday, December 31st, 1960, New Year's Eve day, a private funeral was held for Janice Decker at the Elmer S. Shelley Funeral Home in Lansdale. She was interred at the White Marsh Cemetery. Strangely enough, my research did not turn up a whole lot more about what happened next to William Decker. In January 1960, the coroner's jury returned a homicide verdict for William Decker in the death of Janice Decker, and he was ordered held without bail to await a grand jury trial. That same month, the grand jury indicted William Decker for murder, and he was remanded to the county prison until his trial. 13 months later, in February 1962, a newspaper article indicated that a jury foreman had been selected for Decker's trial. And then, nothing else. Apparently, William Decker never did go to trial for murdering his young wife. Instead, he was committed to a state mental health facility, or an insane asylum as they were known back then. While there, he apparently fell in love with one of his nurses, who he eventually married. He was released from the state hospital in 1968, apparently deemed to no longer be a danger to the public. Now, I certainly don't know anything about mental health issues, and I have no idea what treatments or therapies William Decker underwent during his commitment. And like others of you, I'm sure I can't say that I always agree with how alleged mental health cases are handled by our justice system. But if it was my daughter that was murdered, I would certainly have a hard time accepting that 8 years is sufficient punishment for a crime such as this. And I know that someone will tell me that his commitment wasn't for punishment, but for treatment. But this, I'm sure, was little consolation to the family of Janice Decker. Nonetheless, once released, William Decker apparently was able to live his life for the next 46 years as a productive member of society. Known as Willie by this time, he went on to own and operate 2 service stations for several years, one in West Point on Sumneytown Pike and West Point Pike, and one in Cobesville. He also worked for over 20 years with Quality Coach in Montgomeryville, specializing in handicapped vehicles, and later he worked delivering auto parts. William Decker lived in Percy for a number of years and died on January 3rd, 2014 at the age of 79. His funeral service was held on Saturday, January 18th, 2014 at St. John's United Church of Christ, Lansdale, where he and his wife were members. Before I close, people often ask me if I know what happened to little Billy. Unfortunately, I don't know how he lived his life. I do seem to recall a newspaper article stating that William K. Decker had died by suicide, but I couldn't put my hands on that article to confirm my memory. We know that he was still alive when his father died in 2014 and would have been 56 years old at that time. So if anyone knows more about him, we would be glad to hear from you. Well, thanks again for joining us this evening. I hope that you found this program interesting, and I hope that you join us next time for our March community program. Good night.